What's up, my friends? What if I told you that worms could turn your kitchen scraps into gardening gold? Mine did, at least until my worms went on strike. My first attempt at vermiculture was rough, to say the least. I thought all I needed to do was add bedding, food scraps, and worms, and let nature run its course. But little did I know, nature had some lessons in store for me. This was my first worm farm, a 55-gallon drum with the lid cut off. I added my bedding, food scraps, and worms, thinking I was all good to go. But here's what I didn't anticipate. First off, I had water pooling in the bottom, turning my worm bin into a swamp. Secondly, I had all my worm castings compacting in the bottom of the bin, making it impossible to harvest the castings without tipping the whole bin over and stressing out the worms. Third, the liquid gold, or the worm tea, was just getting poured out on the ground instead of captured for me to use as fertilizer on my garden. So to drain the swamp, I drilled some holes all around the bottom of this bin. I kept the holes real small to keep rodents out, but the holes being so small made them very easy to clog. Debris and other things would fill these holes and render them useless. So the only way for me to drain out this bin was to dump this whole thing out, sift through all the castings, separate the worms, which wasn't any fun for me or the worms. So after that chaotic start, I went on a mission to learn from the pros. I saw videos from Albert from Moon Landing Garden over in Florida, and he likes a system based in a bathtub. Then I saw some of Anne's videos from Plant Obsessed Gardens, where she uses a bin just like this for her worms. But Anne made a brilliant modification to her bin that I'm gonna show you now. Man, it's getting cold outside. Now, while old bathtubs are hard to come by, I already have this drum on hand. So, inspired by Anne's design, I'm going to be cutting this bin along these lines you see here to create a horizontal bin that will, one, make for much easier harvesting of the castings, and two, I'm going to be able to integrate in a drain system that's going to capture that worm tea so that I can use it as fertilizer on my garden. Those two things are going to make for a much happier home for my worms. Now let's get this thing split open. It is now day 2 working on this new vermiculture setup, and let me show you where I'm at. So I have the barrel all supported, it's up on legs, put a lid on it, was able to find some old door hinges, and I drilled a hole in the end that this drain is going to be glued down into. Didn't get the cleanest hole, but that's all right if a few drops end up falling on the ground. But then I have this bucket here with a downspout that I'm going to be putting a funnel at the top, and it's going to sit underneath these barrels catching all that worm tea. Now another aspect to this design is a worm bed that I'm going to be building underneath here. You see how I have this piece of plywood here on the back? I'm going to be framing in this entire bottom section and then filling it with this horse manure that I got from a neighbor. So this horse manure is going to be creating quite a bit of heat that is going to rise up into the barrels and help keep my worms warm over the winter, because worms will actually freeze in the temperatures that we have here if they're not down in the ground using the warmth of the dirt. So I've got to keep this barrel a little bit warmer than it would be otherwise, hopefully above 30 degrees all winter. So I'm hoping that I can do so just using manure in this hotbed that I'm going to build underneath. So it's an experiment. Let's see if it works. All right, so with this lid, I'm trying to conserve heat. So I have this insulated foam left over from other projects. I put a layer on top of the lid, and I'm gonna put another one on the inside of the lid that fits inside of this barrel opening. And I'm also putting this vapor barrier that I have from a prior project, just using it as a waterproof membrane over that lid to keep moisture from penetrating that wood, rotting it out, making it gross and making it cold. So there's going to be insulation on both sides of that lid, hopefully to keep whatever's inside this barrel nice and warm. All right, we are now finished with our improvements to the vermicompost setup. We've got everything laid out here. As you can see, we have the drain here on the downhill side, set up perfectly to be able to drain down into this bucket that will collect all of that for later use. Now over the winter, I'm not going to be getting that much liquid out of this, not nearly as much evaporation and water going through this system as during the winter. So I'm probably not going to have to empty this 5-gallon bucket all winter. So I'm going to go ahead and fill in around it with all the compost, and that'll help keep it warm, keep it from freezing and breaking the bucket. But I also have the lid all insulated now. You see it has the insulation on the inside. It's going to help reflect the heat back down, and waterproof membrane over the top, as well as another layer of insulated foam that's underneath here. So I think that our worms are going to stay nice and cozy, stay productive. If it gets below 50 degrees, those worms slow down a whole bunch. So we want to keep it nice and warm for them so they can break down our food for us. All right, so right now I'm filling the hotbed, and I'm going back and forth between lawn clippings and manure that I got from my neighbor to try to create as nitrogen rich of an environment, to create as much heat as possible. Now, a couple of things that this hotbed needs to heat up: it needs to be able to have air cycling through it, which I actually left some vents here. You'll see here on the side, there's air that can come through, and also same thing on the other side. So there's going to be some air that's able to move through this way, but I want to be able to capture some air as well, because I want to be able to maintain as much heat as possible. So to be able to allow air to move through this hotbed to create the heat, I'm going to have gaps between the next few boards you see right here that I'm going to be putting up as I get more manure and materials into this box. I'm going to make small gaps that's going to allow for air to be able to come through, move through the material to produce heat. I also cut a few lines with my skill saw in this front board. They're not very big, but I hope that they'll allow just a little bit of air to be able to get through this board, getting into that hotbed to produce as much heat as possible to keep my worms nice and cozy. So I'm going to keep filling that hotbed with this manure here, go back and forth between manure and grass clippings, create as good of an environment as possible to create as much heat as possible for those worms. All right, I got the hotbed full of compost, so I'm going to put this last slat up here, and again I'm going to create some spacing that's going to allow for air to come in between these boards. So let's hang this right about here. All right, so now with the gap here in the front, down here, and these ones in the side, I hope that this hotbed has enough oxygen aerating through here that this can heat up and warm up our worm bin. But worm bin is all ready to go. I added this additional filter here on top of the drain because I didn't want any worms to go down through it. I noticed that the holes in the drain were big enough that a worm could potentially fit through, and I didn't want to end up with a bunch of worms down in my bucket, so went ahead and added that drain. So now the only thing left is to fill our vermiculture. Now my worms arrived a few days ago and I wasn't quite ready for them, so I put them in this bin in the meantime and threw a few things in there, and they are just eating right through it. See, they made really quick work of this pumpkin here. But I am ready to get these guys moved out to the compost bin now. Just going to drag this out there, throw it in with all of our other material, and get this started. Here are the 1,000 worms that we got in the mail. Gave them a few days in that other bin to acclimate after the move. And now I'm going to be layering brown and green materials on top of here. Oh my gosh, there are so many worms through here. Come check this out. Just mixed them all up, so now they're trying to get down below. But man, is there a lot of movement through here. So I'm hoping that they enjoy their new home. I'm going to try to give them a bunch of food, everything they need to feel comfortable. Let's go ahead and get this bin filled. Breaking up some of the poop clumps so they can get to the food easier. All right, let's go grab some green and brown material from our yard clippings pile. All right, there's a bunch of brown material. It's already warm. Worms are gonna like that. Go get them some manure. Now I don't want to fill it up completely because I have other food compost that I want to be adding to this over the next few weeks. So this is probably good. I actually have a little bit more green material, or should I say orange material, out front from Halloween that I'm going to add here. Create a nice start to this bed. I think they'll really like some gooey pumpkins. So let's grab those, get those added to the mix. All right, so we've got our green and brown materials all mixed in here, as well as our worms. Now, I also have quite a few food scraps that I'm going to be mixing into the bin, and there's a strategy to this. Now, all the food that I add into this bin, I'm going to add it to one side, and I'm going to bury it. One, putting it all on one side is hopefully going to get all the food, all the worms eating on this side and pooping on this side, making it so I can harvest the castings from here, while the worms and the food are mostly going to be over here. And then two, burying the food keeps it protected from rodents and other things that might try to make their way into the bin, keep the smell down. And since the food is on bottom, the worms should come up more to the top to lay their castings to poop, making it much more easy for me to harvest those castings later on. So it's a method that I saw in the bathtub method that I want to put to the test here, see if it's something that's going to be effective for us. So I'm going to move a bunch of the dirt from this side so that I can bury some of this food. Big old chunk of pumpkin here. It's the top side of my jack-o'-lantern. Here's a bunch of other food scraps from our kitchen. It's to be a bit of a dirty job here. Still got some more pumpkins to add, so better dig out some more space. All right, our worm farm has been in action for 2 days now. So they've had a little bit of time to eat some of those food scraps and pumpkins that we buried for them. And I'm going to continue to bury that food underneath the surface of the dirt so that they're going to leave their castings up on top, making it much easier to harvest. But I'm not going to feed these worms again for another 3 to 4 weeks because I don't want to disturb them, especially during the winter when they're needing as much protection from the cold as possible. But I wanted to show you how well this hot box is working so far that we have underneath here. So I have a temperature sensor on the inside of the box that is reading 37 degrees, while outside we're getting 27 degrees. So there's a 10-degree difference right now between what's inside and outside of the box. I would like for it to get a little bit warmer than that, given that our winter's gonna get a little colder than it is right now. But I'm pretty impressed with that 10-degree difference, given that this has only been sitting here for 2 days. So I hope that this compost and this manure mix underneath here is going to continue to heat up, but this is an experiment. We'll see. But if you have any recommendations on how I can do this better, how to get more heat out of this compost underneath here, or how to treat my worms better to get more castings out of them, let me know down in the comments, because I want to be as successful as possible with this worm farm, and I can set my ego aside and learn from the best, just like I did from these other creators' videos. So thank you guys for sticking around through this project. This has been Jake with Pantry Prep.